I was an alcoholic opera singer. My mother believed in me until the end. She left me her apartment instead of my perfect brother. My brother's wife was furious. "Just wait, he'll lose everything." I met a woman who changed everything. Married her. I became successful. Became a father. At my son's 20th birthday, my sister-in-law's mask finally slipped off. I was always the black sheep of my family, the one who couldn't get his act together. But when my mother died and left me her apartment instead of my responsible older brother, everything changed. Not because of what I gained, but because of what it revealed. The golden son versus the failure. Growing up, the roles in our family were clearly defined. My brother Mark was 7 years older, the responsible one. Good grades, steady career, married his college sweetheart at 23. The picture of stability. I, on the other hand, was the artistic one, which was just a polite way of saying I was unreliable. Don't get me wrong, I had talent. I graduated from a prestigious conservatory as an opera singer. My mother would beam with pride when I performed, something that never went unnoticed by my brother or his wife Patricia. But while I had musical gifts, I lacked direction. After graduation, I returned to my hometown only to discover that an opera singer wasn't exactly in high demand in our mid-sized Midwestern city. Auditions led nowhere. Teaching positions were filled. It felt like my years of training were worthless. So I did what many disillusioned artists do. I started drinking. A lot. I played guitar at local bars, scraping together enough for rent and alcohol. My performances became increasingly sloppy, my reputation deteriorating. But the booze numbed the pain of failure. My mother never gave up on me, though. When I'd visit her apartment in the heart of downtown, a beautiful pre-war building with high ceilings and hardwood floors, she'd make my favorite meals and talk about the days when I'd get back on my feet. Her unwavering faith was both comforting and crushing. I knew I was disappointing her. Mark and Patricia would visit for Sunday dinners, their perfect life a stark contrast to my chaos. Patricia would look around the apartment with barely concealed covetousness. It was the kind of place you couldn't afford any more. Rent-controlled, in the perfect location, filled with memories and antiques collected over decades. "Mom, you should think about moving to a retirement community," she'd suggest regularly. "This place is too much for you to maintain. Plus, think of the money you could get if you sold it." My mother would just smile and change the subject. The inheritance, that changed everything. When my mother died after a short battle with pancreatic cancer, I was devastated. She was my biggest supporter, the one person who never lost faith in me. The day after her funeral, we met with her attorney for the reading of the will. I still remember Patricia's face when the lawyer said, "And to my son Alexander, I leave my apartment and all its contents." Her smile froze, then slowly morphed into something between disbelief and rage. Mark looked stunned but composed. Patricia didn't bother hiding her feelings. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice tight. "Alexander can't possibly maintain a property. He can barely maintain himself." The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The will is quite clear, Mrs. Wilson. Mrs. Wilson was of sound mind when she made these decisions." The ride down the elevator was silent, tension thick enough to slice. When we reached the street, Patricia finally exploded. "This is completely unfair. We've been taking care of your mother for years, while you've been drunk half the time. That apartment should go to someone who deserves it, who will take care of it." Mark tried to calm her down, but the damage was done. As they walked away, I heard Patricia whisper loudly enough for me to hear, "Don't worry. He'll drink himself to death within a year, and then we'll get the apartment anyway." The spiral downward. She wasn't entirely wrong about the drinking. After Mom died, losing both her and the reality of my wasted potential hit me like a freight train. I went on a bender that lasted weeks. The apartment that had once been so full of warmth and life now felt like a mausoleum. I could see my mother everywhere, at the kitchen table, reading in her favorite chair, watering her beloved plants that were now withering from neglect. Those weeks are still a blur of alcohol, grief, and self-loathing. I'd wake up on the couch, empty bottles surrounding me, and catch sight of my reflection in the mirror. Bloodshot eyes, unshaven, a ghost of the promising young man my mother had believed in. Family gatherings became unbearable. Every time I saw Mark and Patricia, I could feel their judgment, their expectation of my failure. Patricia would make not-so-subtle comments about the apartment's condition or remind everyone of my latest mishap. "Did you know Alexander tried to pawn Mom's silver last month? Thank goodness the shop owner knew her and called us." The worst part was I had tried to pawn the silver. I needed money for booze, and my gigs were drying up because I was too unreliable. The shame of that moment, the shop owner's pitying look, the call to my brother, was excruciating. I was becoming exactly what they expected me to be. A failure, a disappointment, someone who didn't deserve his mother's faith or her final gift. The woman who changed everything. 6 months after my mother's death, I was at rock bottom. I'd been fired from my regular gig at O'Malley's pub after showing up too drunk to play. I was behind on the building's maintenance fees. The apartment was a mess of empty bottles, take-out containers, and unwashed clothes.
That's when Sarah walked into my life. Literally walked in. She was the building's new property manager, doing inspections after complaints about the smell coming from my apartment. "This is unacceptable," she said, looking around at the chaos. No hello, no introduction. Just straight to the point. I was hungover and defensive. "It's my apartment. I can live how I want." She crossed her arms. "Not if it affects other residents. Not if you're violating the terms of your ownership agreement. I should report this to the board." Something about her directness cut through my fog. She wasn't pitying me or judging me like my family. She was simply stating facts. "Give me a week," I heard myself say. "1 week to clean this up." She studied me, her expression skeptical. "1 week. Then I'm back to inspect. And you might want to shower before then." With that, she turned and left. I'd love to say I immediately turned my life around, but recovery isn't that simple. What I did do was shower, clean enough to eliminate the smell, and make it through 3 days without drinking before I caved. But when Sarah returned, she noticed the effort. "It's a start," she said, slightly less stern. "But you need help, Alexander." "Alex," I corrected automatically. No one calls me Alexander except my family when they're disappointed in me. Something softened in her expression. "Well, Alex, I know a guy who runs a musicians support group. Lots of people with similar struggles. Here's the address." I took the card, not planning to go, but that night, staring at yet another empty bottle, I heard my mother's voice in my head. "You're better than this, Alex. You've always been better than this." The next day, I went to the meeting. The long road back. Recovery isn't linear. There were slips, relapses, days when the urge to drink was so strong I thought I'd break apart from wanting it. But for the first time, I had people who understood. Musicians who'd faced similar demons, who knew what it was like to have talent but not success, passion but not stability. Sarah checked in regularly, first professionally, then personally. She'd stop by with coffee, ask about my progress, sometimes just sit and listen when I needed to talk. Slowly, something shifted between us. A friendship that gradually became something more. As I got sober, the fog lifted. I started teaching piano and voice lessons to children in the neighborhood. It wasn't the operatic career I dreamed of, but there was joy in sharing music, in seeing young faces light up when they mastered a difficult piece. Sarah was the one who suggested starting the jazz band. "You're always playing old standards when you think no one's listening," she said one evening as we sat on my balcony. "I know the manager at the Blue Note. They're looking for a house band for Thursday nights." I hesitated. I haven't performed sober since college. She took my hand. Maybe it's time. The Jazz Aristocrats began as a Thursday night experiment. Me on guitar and vocals, two guys from my support group on bass and drums, and a brilliant young woman on piano who had been one of my first students. We played jazz standards, classic rock with a jazz twist, even some of my original compositions. People started coming specifically to see us. Regular gigs led to private events, which led to a small but devoted following. Music was back in my life, but this time without the self-destruction. The business of music. 3 years into sobriety, I was teaching full-time and performing regularly. The apartment was restored to its former glory, filled once again with music and life. Sarah had moved in, bringing order to my chaos and love when I least expected to find it. We were having dinner one night when she mentioned that Grayson's music shop was closing. Old Mr. Grayson is retiring, and his kids don't want to take over the business. I felt a pang of sadness. Grayson's was where my mother had bought my first guitar, where I'd purchased countless sheet music books over the years. Someone should keep it going, I said without thinking. Sarah's eyes lit up. Why not you? The idea was terrifying. Me? Run a business? I was barely keeping my own life together. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I knew music. I knew musicians. I'd been teaching long enough to understand what students needed. I approached Mr. Grayson, expecting rejection. Instead, I found enthusiasm. I've been worried about selling to some corporate chain that doesn't care about musicians, he said. You understand what this place means to the community. With a loan against my apartment, Sarah's savings, and Mr. Grayson's generous owner financing, I became the proprietor of Harmony House Music Emporium. We expanded the lesson programs, hosted jam sessions and recitals, and curated a selection of instruments that catered to both serious musicians and beginners. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, the business thrived. Within 5 years, we doubled our square footage, hired a staff of teachers, and become the go-to music resource in 3 counties. The ultimate joy. As my professional life stabilized, Sarah and I began talking about family. At 40, I worried it might be too late, that my years of hard living had cost me the chance at fatherhood. But life had one more surprise in store. Zachary James Wilson was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. When I held him for the first time, this tiny person with my mother's eyes, I made him a silent promise to be the father he deserved, to create a stable home filled with music and love, to be worthy of this miraculous second chance. Mark and Patricia came to see the baby, their first visit to the apartment in years. I'd sent them announcements of my sobriety milestones, the band's performances, the store opening, all met with brief, formal congratulations that made it clear they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Mark seemed genuinely happy about the baby, awkwardly holding Zachary while making grandfather noises. Patricia wandered around the apartment, taking in the changes, the nursery that had once been my mother's sewing room, the new kitchen Sarah had insisted on, the family photos that now included Sarah's parents alongside pictures of my mother. "You've certainly been busy," she said, her tone unreadable. "I'm surprised you've managed to maintain the apartment so well." "Thank you," I replied simply, refusing to rise to the bait. Mom would have loved to see it full of family again. Something flickered across her face. Regret? Resentment? But she said nothing more. The truth revealed. Time passed. Zachary grew from infant to toddler to a boy with his grandmother's love for music and his mother's practical nature. The business expanded to 3 locations. The Jazz Aristocrats recorded 2 albums, nothing chart-topping but respectable sellers that got local radio play. Life was full and good in a way I never could have imagined during those dark days after my mother's death. For Zachary's 20th birthday, we planned a special celebration. He was studying music business at Berklee College of Music, following in both his parents' footsteps in his own way. The entire family would be there. Sarah's side, Mark and Patricia, their daughters and their husbands, even some of my old friends from the support group who'd become like family. The party was in full swing when Patricia approached me. champagne glass in hand. 2 decades had added silver to her hair and lines to her face, but her posture was still rigid with pride. "I have to admit, Alexander," she said, using my full name as always, "you've done well for yourself. Your mother would be pleased." It was the closest thing to approval she'd ever offered, and I accepted it with a nod. "Thank you, Patricia. That means a lot." She sipped her champagne, watching Zachary laughing with his cousins. "I remember when news of his birth came," she continued, her smile tightening slightly. "It was quite the shock for all of us, like a hammer to the head." The room seemed to go silent, though the party continued around us. Everyone nearby had heard her words, the naked truth finally spoken aloud. My son's birth hadn't been a joy to them. It had been the final nail in the coffin of their expectations, their hopes that I would fail, and the apartment would eventually be theirs. Patricia realized what she'd said, her face flushing as she met the disapproving stares of those around us. She mumbled something about a slip of the tongue and retreated to Mark's side, whispering urgently to him as he frowned. In that moment, I felt nothing but pity. 20 years she'd carried that resentment, watching as I built a life she'd been certain I didn't deserve. How exhausting it must have been, waiting for a failure that never came. The aftermath. Today, at 60, I look back on that moment as a turning point in our family dynamics. Patricia's slip forced everything into the open: the expectation of my failure, the resentment over my inheritance, the belief that I wasn't worthy of my mother's faith. Mark and I had a long, difficult conversation a few weeks after the party. For the first time, he admitted how much it had hurt that our mother left me the apartment. "I'd always done everything right," he said. "And you were a mess, Alex." It felt like she was rewarding your failure. "She wasn't rewarding my failure," I replied quietly. "She was investing in my potential. She knew you'd be okay without her help. You always had been. But I needed that foundation to build from. We're not close, Mark and I. Too much water under the bridge. But we're cordial now, with a better understanding of each other." Patricia has made her peace with reality, though she still keeps her distance. Their daughters, my nieces, have developed their own relationships with me as adults, free from their parents' narratives. Sarah and I still live in the apartment, though we've discussed downsizing now that Zachary is grown. But there's something special about these walls that have witnessed both my darkest moments and my greatest joys. My mother's presence still lingers here, not as a ghost, but as a foundation, her faith in me the cornerstone upon which I rebuilt my life. Sometimes when I'm alone, practicing a new song or just sitting quietly, I swear I can hear her voice. "I always knew you had it in you, Alex. I always knew." And the thing is, I think she really did. She saw beyond the mess I was to the man I could become. Her inheritance wasn't just an apartment. It was a second chance, a belief that I was worth investing in when I couldn't see it myself. That's the true value of an inheritance, not its financial worth, but the love and faith it represents. The belief that someone saw your potential even when you were at your worst. And sometimes that belief is exactly what you need to find your way back to your best self. As for me, I've learned that it's never too late to become the person your mother always thought you could be, even if it takes hitting rock bottom first, even if no one else believes it's possible, even if you don't believe it yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't what you inherit, it's what you become because of it.